Anyway, okay, physiological response to drugs. The body may deal with drugs in several different ways. It may develop a tolerance to the drug. It may develop a tissue dependence to the drug. It may not especially have a physiological response, but a psychological dependence to the drug. They may go through withdrawals, or they may develop the ability to break down the drug faster, to metabolize it faster and get it out of their system. This is really kind of bizarre because it really all depends on the individual, and it also depends on the drug. So when we're talking about the individual, we're talking about people. Some people like, for me, for example, I'm not sensitive to caffeine. I was with my brother this weekend. I told you my brother drank a Mountain Dew one time on his way to Virginia, driving to Virginia, and ended up in Maine, blacked out. From the caffeine, because he's so sensitive to caffeine. I can drink all the caffeine in the world and I don't have an effect at all. It doesn't keep me awake, it doesn't do anything to me. Opioids. If you want to knock my brother out, just give him a whiff of morphine, and it just wipes him right out. Me, you can give me a shot of morphine, I don't feel it. If you want to kill me, shoot me up with all the morphine you want, it's not going to make any difference. It doesn't work on me. So it really all depends. We are all different, as exciting as that may seem. So we really don't know what kind of reaction somebody's going to have to a drug. Is it going to be one of these? Is there going to be no reaction whatsoever? So when I was getting my first divorce, my friends came over and told me, I know how to take care of this. We'll go out and get drunk. Takes care of all problems. And of course I got drunk and it accelerated my problems, so that wasn't a very good idea. So everybody reacts differently to things.
Sorry,
Any foreign substance will be treated as a toxin in your body. Any foreign substance. So if we are taking in smoking marijuana, if we're smoking tobacco, if we're drinking alcohol, if we're shooting up with crystal meth, they are all toxins, and they have to be taken care of. They have to be taken out of the body. The liver and the kidneys will try to eliminate it so that it cannot do any damage. If the individual continues to use the substance, the body will adapt to having the drug present. And that adaptation is the tolerance that we talk about. You develop a tolerance to the body. The human body wants to be in a state of homeostasis. It wants everything to be balanced. It doesn't want to be insane and dance around with a lampshade on its head. It doesn't want to be drunk. It doesn't want to be stoned. It wants to be normal. It wants everything to be balanced. And that's what the human body tries to do. It tries to make itself balanced. So the neurotransmitters will either downregulate or upregulate, looking for the drug or trying to protect itself from the drug. And that's the way the human body will try to protect itself. If the individual continues to use, this adaptation to the presence of the toxin is called tolerance, as I just said. Tolerance to the drug will force the individual to take more and more of the drug to get the same effect. So the first time you take crystal meth, a lot of times you'll have meth dealers that will give you drugs. The first time they will give you the drug because they know that tomorrow you're going to be looking for the drug again and you're going to need more. This time you'll buy it. The next time you look for the drug, you're going to have twice as much as the first dosing in order to get the same buzz. So now all of a sudden their profit margin is just increasing exponentially because you need that drug. And you're going to have more and more and more and more just in order to get any kind of a buzz. The problem is, of course, that you're going to have to take the same level to have no reaction to it at all, to feel balanced. You're still going to have to take some of the drug, because if you don't take any of the drug, now all of a sudden your body has a physiological dependence. So in order to feel normal, you're going to have to take the drug. A methamphetamine user will achieve a certain level of euphoria and energy the first time that they use it. If they use every day for 100 days, by the 100th day they will have built up a tolerance for the drug that will necessitate a 20 times increase in the amount that they use the first time. This is the lady. This is a year and a half later. This is what she looked like. As you can see, her face is messed up. Her hair is kind of messed up as well. This guy, this is 3 months after they took this picture. This is him 3 months later after crystal meth. This is 2.5 years later. This is what the lady looked like at one point, and then 2.5 years later you can see she's all wrinkled and crinkled and looks a lot older than 2.5 years older than the first picture. This is the thing, these are the things that happen to you on crystal meth. It destroys your immune system, so all of a sudden you can't fight off impetigo or herpes. Usually it's herpes. And now we've got all kinds of interesting problems with these individuals. In order for tolerance to occur, sometimes the drugs must be taken irresponsibly. If the individual is taking Valium at a higher doses than the doctor prescribes, or the doctor is prescribing heavy usage of the medication, the tolerance will be accelerated. And of course, this is what happened to Michael Jackson. This is one of the reasons why Michael Jackson died, is because he was taking more than he was supposed to. But it was the doctor that was giving him more than he was supposed to. Right? It wasn't the doctor? Okay. Research shows that there are individuals who have built up a tolerance to the degree that they are using 100 to 200 times the standard dosage. So when I take pills in the morning, I take blood pressure pills. When I take my pills in the morning, I take a certain level. And theoretically, it keeps my blood pressure normal. But I can imagine having to take 100 to 200 times the dosage. That means I'd have to take, instead of taking one pill in the morning, I'd have to take 100 to 200 pills in the morning. That's a lot of pills. I know. I can imagine what that'd do to my stomach. There are different types of tolerance. One type of tolerance is called dispositional tolerance. The body accelerates the metabolism of the drug by producing more of the enzyme used to metabolize the toxic substance. So the body is trying to protect itself with the enzyme. It's trying to break it down faster. And this is known as dispositional tolerance. The more people drink alcohol, the greater their tolerance because of dispositional tolerance. Thus, the individual will have to consume high levels of alcohol to become intoxicated. I don't know if you have been around anybody that drinks, but one of the interesting things is that they don't even get drunk off the first six-pack. They may not even get drunk off the first six-pack. Red Fox, famous comedian, African-American comedian, had a tree growing in his living room, which isn't important at all. He said he knew he was an alcoholic when he drank a fifth of vodka and didn't feel it. I know. He had developed that much tolerance for alcohol. And he didn't even realize that it was happening. But he could drink a fifth of vodka without getting drunk. I could take a shot of vodka and get drunk. And he's drinking the whole bottle and not getting drunk. Pharmacodynamic tolerance. Affected nerve cells become less sensitive to the drug. When opioids are used, neurons begin generating fewer receptor cells to the opioid to lessen its effects, the downregulation. The body will also produce cholecystokinin as an antagonist to the drug. So if you take opioids, if you're a heroin addict, one of the things that happens is your body tries to protect itself. It's trying to keep from you overdosing. And the way it does this is by downregulating. So now you have to take more of the drug to get more of a buzz. But of course, as far as your body is concerned, it's just seeking balance. That's all it's doing. The other thing is that your body will produce more cholecystokinin. Now, one of the interesting things about heroin addicts is that a lot of times after they go straight and they get off their drug, a lot of times they will have gallbladder disease because the gallbladder produces cholecystokinin. And what will happen is once they don't need it anymore, since they have overstimulated their gallbladder will start to swell, and it accumulates gallstones and whatnot. And a lot of times they will suffer from gallbladder disease or during their heroin addiction. Of course, if they have their gallbladder taken out while they're still using heroin, then they may die because they don't have the cholecystokinin in their system to temper the heroin that they're taking. So the first time they take heroin after they have their gallbladder taken out, they overdose. I know. Behavioral tolerance, the brain compensates for the effects of the drug by using parts of the brain not affected. People can be drunk and not act drunk. How does that work? Well, as you're drinking, you anesthetize your brain from the frontal lobe all the way back to your cerebellum. But there are parts of your brain that aren't affected yet. And so what the individual will do is they will reroute the thinking process or the speaking process through a portion of the brain that is not inebriated yet. I know that sounds kind of bizarre. How do you do this? Well, I know. It's really kind of weird. My son would talk about people that would come up to the bar and they'd order a drink and then they would head back to their table and all of a sudden they could barely walk. So in order to get their drink, they had to reroute the whole process, the whole ordering process. If they had seemed like they were inebriated, he wouldn't have served them. So in order to get the drink, they have to act like they're not drunk. But you can't really do that unless you can reroute it in your brain. And that's exactly what they would do. So sometimes he would serve them even though they were fairly inebriated. Reverse tolerance, as the drug destroys tissue, the user becomes more sensitive to the drug and can tolerate less and less of the substance. This happens with alcoholics when they have cirrhosis of the liver. The liver is slowly dying, so the liver isn't processing the alcohol as well as it was before. So if you're a really good alcoholic and you've been an alcoholic for an extended length of time, it really doesn't take much alcohol to get you drunk because your liver can't process it anymore, as strange as that may seem. So you get drunk a lot faster on less alcohol. Of course, it takes a number of years of heavy drinking to get cirrhosis of the liver. But by that time, of course, the process has already taken place. Acute tolerance or tachyphylaxis. The brain and the body adapt instantly to the toxic effects of the drug. This is what happens with tobacco. The first time if you have ever smoked a cigarette, the first time you smoked, you probably coughed and gagged and maybe turned green. It made you sick to your stomach. The next time you smoked, you could smoke fine without any problem, and you got a little bit of a buzz. Why? Because you had an instant tolerance to the tobacco. So now you can take in more of the tobacco without any effect whatsoever. People who try to commit suicide using barbiturates may experience the same instant tolerance and survive twice the lethal dosage. In other words, the human body is trying to protect itself, and the way it does this is by developing an instant tolerance to the barbiturates. So here you are taking a dose that should kill an elephant, and you don't die. Well, that doesn't seem fair at all. You're trying to commit suicide, and here you have failed. But it's because the human body is trying to protect itself. It's trying to maintain a homeostasis. LSD. Now, the reality of LSD is it doesn't take very much to get you high, for you to trip LSD. But you can't get a double dosage. You can't take an extra trip. You can't get more inebriated by taking more LSD. You can take a tiny little microgram of LSD and have a trip. You can drink a whole bottle of this stuff and you're still going to have the same effect. The body will just cleanse itself. It'll just run right out of your body. It doesn't work that way. You can't get a really super trip from taking more of the LSD. It doesn't work that way. And you can't overdose on LSD. You can drink the whole supply of LSD for the United States. It wouldn't kill you. You would only have one trip because the human body can only tolerate that much of a trip. So it doesn't really make any difference. You can't like trip for 3 or 4 days by taking extra dosages of LSD. You have to let the LSD wear off before you take another dosage of it, because the brain can only tolerate so much. And this is known as tachyphylaxis. Select tolerance. The body develops tolerance to mental and physical effects at different rates. This occurs with opiates and sedatives. With barbiturates, sleep will be induced long after the euphoric effect is no longer present. And that's why barbiturates are taken to knock you out. First time you take the barbiturate, you may have a euphoric effect. It's not going to last very long. It's only going to last for 5 or 10 minutes, and then it knocks you out. So you have a physical effect after you have the mental effect. So people like to take barbiturates, but it's not a very long-lasting high. So why in the world would you do it? Inverse tolerance or kindling, the brain chemistry changes so that the person becomes more sensitive to the effects of the drug. This is really kind of bizarre because the more you use cocaine, the more sensitive you become to cocaine. It's the same way with marijuana. So people that can just think about smoking marijuana and they can act like they're stoned. They seem like they're stoned. You can smoke a lot of marijuana, and if you are doing this for an extended length of time, after a certain amount of time, your body becomes so sensitive to marijuana that you only have to smoke a little bit of it to get the same effect as you did from a lot of it. And cocaine is exactly the same way. Of course, the problem with cocaine, marijuana is probably not going to kill you, but cocaine will. It can overexcite the heart and cause a heart attack or a stroke. And sometimes people have been snorting cocaine for an extended length of time. All of a sudden they stroke out from the cocaine. Why? Because they have an inverse tolerance. It has built up in their system, and now they have a stronger reaction to the cocaine, and now they're dead. Sorry. Cross tolerance, if a person develops a tolerance for one drug in a family of drugs, they will be tolerant of other drugs in that family. The opioid family is this way. Tolerance to heroin will make the person equally tolerant to morphine, codeine, or methadone. They can't take any opiates or any opioids. They'll have the same reaction from these other opioids that they did from the heroin. A person tolerant of Xanax will be tolerant to benzodiazepines and even the depressant alcohol. So if you are taking Xanax, they tell you not to drink any alcohol. If you do, potentially you'll have the same reaction that you did from the Xanax. So you have to be kind of careful. A person tolerant to barbiturates will be tolerant to benzodiazepines, and that is cross-tolerance. Tissue dependence, this is the biological change of the body to adapt to the presence of the drug. This usually occurs after prolonged use. You develop a tissue dependence. Allostasis sometimes will occur where the tissues and the organs of the body depend on the drug to be functional. In other words, if you don't have your drink of alcohol, now all of a sudden your body starts to shut down. You need the alcohol just in order to function. In these circumstances, cessation of the drug usage will cause dangerous and dramatic withdrawals. In select circumstances, cross-dependence will occur where dependence of one drug can be alleviated with another drug, and a lot of times that's what they will do. If you go in to clean up from alcohol, a lot of times they'll give you an antidepressant in order to keep you from having an extreme reaction to the alcohol. They used to give people laudanum. Laudanum is opium. Tincture of opium is what it is. So you were actually drinking alcohol to make yourself feel better. It's the hair of the dog. So if you have a hangover the next day, you can take a little drink a can of beer. Everything's copacetic. Everything's fine. As exciting as that is. Physiological or psychological dependence, addiction used to mean that the person taking the drug was tissue dependent on the drug. But with continued research in brain imaging technology, it has been recognized that psychological dependence is an important factor in addictive behavior. The altered states of consciousness that are caused by select drugs can lead to continued misuse to avoid life's problems. So you have a psychological dependence. We used to think that marijuana wasn't addictive, and you can still read this on the internet if you look at the right websites. They will still tell you that it's not addictive, but the reality is it is addictive. The difference between opium and or heroin and marijuana is that opium clears your system in a couple days. Marijuana doesn't clear your system for a month. So it stays in your system for an extended length of time. We didn't realize this, so we were thinking it wasn't addictive because people were smoking marijuana and they didn't have a craving for it later on. Why not? Well, they still had it in their system. So they were getting little, tiny dosages of it all through the next month. Okay. And of course, people are trying to alleviate their problems by getting stoned at night. You don't worry about things when you're stoned on marijuana. You don't worry about things when you're drunk. You don't worry about things when you're shooting up with heroin. You don't worry about anything. This is a psychological dependence. It is now acknowledged that psychological dependence occurs before tissue dependence does, and that the response rate from either is quite similar. Psychological factors that induce reinforcement, drug automatism. The individual uses the drug aimlessly, unconsciously, and repetitively. So if you don't even think about going home and blazing up, toking, I don't know how, a blunt or something, I don't know. If you don't even think about it, you just do it automatically. All of a sudden, you go home and the first thing you do is go to the refrigerator for a can of beer. Well, that's automatism. You're just doing it. You're just doing it automatically. You're not even thinking about drinking that beer. Same thing with shooting. Of course, shooting up is a little bit different. You have to go get the needle. You have to do all that stuff with the needle and whatnot. Negative reinforcement, unpleasant states encourage drug usage. Smokers will wake up in the middle of the night to smoke to dissipate their nicotine withdrawal. As odd as that sounds. Social reinforcement, peer pressure, and the need for social inclusion encourages continued use. So if you have friends, and these are the friends that you smoke dope with, and so at night you call these guys up to find out what they're doing tonight. Well, you know what they're doing. They're going to blaze up if you can get a hold of them. So, but you call them. You have to get a hold of these people. These are the people you smoke dope with. My God, so you call them up as soon as you get off work, you dial their numbers, and there's like 5 of them, and Charlie's not home, what's going on? He must be, maybe he went to Gallup, I don't know, maybe he's in Farmington, and then there's George. Oh my God, I always smoke with George, but George, I can't get a hold of him. Maybe his phone doesn't work. He forgot to plug it in again. George. You know how George is, he never plugs in his telephone. And then all of a sudden you're dialing all the rest of these people that you don't really like. But there are other people that you smoke pot with. And you don't have any, so you're hoping that they've got some. Social reinforcement. So how do we cure these individuals? And of course, we see this with alcohol. These guys always go to the casino, and when they're at the casino, they always, drink a 6-pack, or they take tequila shots. It's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. So they always go back. Or they always go to the bar with the same guys. And they always sit there and they don't talk about anything. They just slowly get drunk. But this is their lifestyle, going to the bar, getting drunk. Even though they don't even like these people. But they're the people that they drink with, or smoke with, or shoot up with. Social reinforcement. Opioid effects, psychological responses to drugs. When you shoot up with opioids, or you take opioids, it causes a numbness throughout the body. It gives you a sense of euphoria. I had a friend, the first person I ever talked to about who was a heroin addict, he said using heroin is like dying. He said it's the best feeling in the world. I'm thinking, dying is the best feeling in the world? Let me think about this for a second. Sex is kind of fun, but dying is better? Wait a minute, let me think about this. It's really kind of bizarre. But he said it feels like dying because all your problems go away. You get this euphoric effect, and you know that nothing's going to bother you ever again. Ever. And it feels like you're dying. He said that was a good feeling. I don't know. It just drives me crazy. Numbness, euphoria, dryness of mouth, constipation, which is always fun. Geez, I can't poop. This is great. Decreased pulse, so it slows your heart rate down. It lowers your blood pressure, and if you have low blood pressure, heroin's probably not the drug of choice. Shouldn't be anyway. Your breathing becomes shallow. You can't cough. And you can't take a deep breath. So don't go out and try to run a mile or something, because you won't be able to, well, you won't be able to run for one thing. The most bizarre part is pinpoint pupils. So if somebody came in unconscious, the first thing we would do was look at their pupils to find out if they were pinpoint. These guys can't see very well. And the reason they can't see very well is because the pupil barely has an opening in it. So if they open their eyes, they're not really seeing anything. Maybe that's the death that my friend was talking about. Anyway, they have pinpoint pupils. And if we see this, we look at this in the emergency room and we find pinpoint pupils, then we give them Narcan. Or in the old days, of course, we didn't have Narcan. So we tried to give them something that would block the opioids. Malaise. You can't get them to do anything. Okay, so let's assume that this person is financing their opium usage, their heroin usage, with prostitution. What's the probability that this person is going to be able to turn tricks? We know that there are crack whores, that you can finance it by taking stimulants. But what about heroin? Is there any such thing as a heroin whore? It rhymes, so is it possible that this person's going to be a lot of fun? Malaise, they can't cough, their blood pressure is low. Wait a minute, sex is kind of an exciting thing, right? So you're supposed to be energized, right? And this person, that you get the very opposite of that. Anyway, no, it's not a possibility. Withdrawal symptoms from opioid substances, tactile reaction, they're very sensitive to pain. So when these people are coming down off of their heroin, it's really kind of fascinating because they're extremely sensitive to pain. So everything bothers them. Psychological reaction, anxiety, depression, and craving for the drug, of course. Physical excretory reaction. Remember before that they couldn't cough? Now all of a sudden that's all they can do. They sweat and it stinks. It smells so bad. They get a runny nose, their eyes water, they get increased salivation, which is just the most bizarre thing in the world. Remember before when they were shooting up, they had dry mouth. Now all of a sudden they are salivating, and it stinks. And the reason it stinks is because they had dry mouth before. So it gave them halitosis. And now that they are salivating, their saliva is very noxious. It really smells bad. Digestive tract, they get diarrhea. Remember before when they were shooting up with heroin, they were constipated. Now all of a sudden they're squirting all over the place. Circulatory reaction, before it lowered their blood pressure. Now as they're coming down off of the heroin, they get hypertension. The respiratory reaction is the excessive coughing, and it smells bad. It really stinks. I know you guys don't even want to think about how something smells, but the reality is that all of this stuff smells really nasty, okay? It's like they've been saving all this odor up for an extended length of time. All of a sudden they're expelling it from their bodies. Optic reaction, their pupils, instead of being pinpoint, are now dilated. Muscular reaction, they tend to have hyper reflexes and muscle cramps. So they're just a lot of fun to be around, as you can imagine. They smell bad for one. And I know smell isn't important, but it is real important when you're around it. Drug withdrawal is the body's attempt to rebalance itself after cessation of prolonged use of psychoactive substances. Many times for a chronic user, fear of withdrawal is one of the reasons for continued use. Especially with heroin. This is just when they're coming down. This isn't the withdrawal symptoms. You can multiply this times 10, and that's them trying to go cold turkey. It scares them to death. Alcoholics are worse. People die from trying to come off of alcohol. They die from the withdrawals. They go into seizures and die. Withdrawal often entails muscle aches, pain, insomnia, vomiting, cramps, and on occasion convulsions. Not so much with opium, but certainly with alcohol, convulsions are very common, relatively common. So this is dangerous stuff. This is really dangerous stuff, the withdrawal. Non-purposive withdrawal, visible physical signs due to tissue dependence. The individual will go into seizures, they will sweat profusely, they'll have what they refer to as crawling flesh, goosebumps. It feels like to them, and this is what's going on in their brain, that they have bugs crawling all over their skin. As horrible and odd as that seems. Vomiting, diarrhea, and tremors, and that's non-purposive withdrawal. Purposive withdrawal, the expectation of withdrawal symptoms causing the rationalization of continued use of the psychoactive substances. Heroin was real popular with rock stars, with people in rock bands for the longest time in the late 60s, early 70s. And most of these people are dead now. Tom Petty and his famous Heartbreakers. Well, he just died a couple of weeks ago from a fentanyl overdose. Why in the world did he use so much fentanyl? He used a patch, he shot up and he took a pill. And they were all fentanyl. Fentanyl's what, 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine. And here he is, he's using 3 different dosages of it. They called it an accidental overdose, but was it really? This is some heavy stuff. And so for that reason, a lot of people don't want to go through withdrawals. The Rolling Stones, geez, how many drummers did they lose from drug overdose, heroin overdoses? I know, it's crazy. All of those Rolling Stones should be dead, except maybe Mick Jagger. I don't know how much stuff he used, but I mean, all these people are dying. Prince died of a fentanyl overdose. Withdrawal effects can be observed whether there is tissue dependence or not. So it's psychological, and they don't want to go through the withdrawals. People that go through the delirium tremens when they've been drinking excessively for an extended length of time, if they don't get a drink, then they start going through the withdrawals. The whole tremor things, they'll get a tremor in their hands. But it's up here where the problem is, because they start seeing monsters. It's not the pink elephants, it's not cute little things dancing along. That's not the way it works. When they go through withdrawals, they see monsters, they feel monsters. They have bugs crawling all over their skin, despite the fact there aren't any bugs there. That's the way it feels to them. If they are afraid of something, that's what affects them. If they're afraid of rats, then they start seeing rats crawling along the wall. And they're afraid that they're going to bite them. If you've ever been bitten by a rat. Oh, who's been bitten by it? Nobody. Protracted withdrawal, heavy craving for the drug, even after the addict has been detoxified. This is usually caused from an external cue that causes the subject to have flashbacks to use and withdrawal symptoms. This often causes a recovering addict to relapse, and of course this is what happened with Robin Williams. Robin Williams had been clean for an extended length of time. He had a cocaine habit, and all of a sudden he fell off the wagon. And he was deathly afraid that he was going back to where he was before. Something that he couldn't control. He enjoyed being in control of himself. He had become a fairly good and famous actor. And now all of a sudden he used again. And he didn't mean to. He just fell off the wagon. And the next thing we knew, he committed suicide. Post-acute withdrawal symptoms. Oh, so one of the things about protracted withdrawal, if you've known anybody that was a recovered or recovering alcoholic, I had lots of friends up north that were recovering alcoholics. And sometimes they would just get grouchy. Just all of a sudden they'd get grouchy. And they used to refer to it as the dry drunks. It was the fact that their craving was so bad that it just made them mean. Now when they were drinking, what they would do, they would pick on somebody until that somebody reacted to them, and that gave them an excuse to drink. And they would start doing that again. They weren't really planning on drinking again, but they couldn't help themselves. This had become a habit that they had become conditioned to create this situation where they could go out and drink. So they would do it again. I had a friend that had been sober for 17 years. And one night he called me up on the telephone and just ripped me up one side and down the other. And I'm going, what the hell? What did I do? You know, he called me all kinds of white, you know. That wasn't nice. Well, what he was he was having the dry drunks. He was going through the withdrawal symptoms again. He hadn't had a drink in 17 years. He had been clean and sober for 17 years. While he was a drinker, he was gay. When he wasn't drunk, he had no sexual desires whatsoever. It was just the most bizarre thing in the world. And all of a sudden, he just ripped into me, trying to get me to call him names so that he could go out and get drunk again, kind of. He really wasn't going to do it. He'd been clean and sober for 17 years. Anyway, dry drunks, they do exist. So you need to be careful if you're around somebody that is a recovered or recovering drug addict or an alcoholic. Sometimes they will go into these strange mood swings. And what they're trying to do is their brain is trying to correct this whole thing in their brain. In the old days, they used to irritate people, and then that gave them an excuse to go out and get drunk again. And that's what they were doing. And luckily, he called me. I mean, if he called his brother probably would have cussed him out, and then he actually might have gone out and gotten drunk. And that's what he would do. He'd call his brother up on the telephone, and he'd give him a hard time, and then his brother would just tell him to, go to hell. And so he did. He'd go out and get drunk. And that was his method of drinking. Kind of interesting. Persistent post-acute withdrawal symptoms, persistent emotional and physical problems that last from 3 to 6 months after recovery. The brain isn't cured yet, not really. It's still kind of in that same drunk or inebriated mode. So the thinking is unclear, and you have cognitive impairment. Memory problems, emotional overreaction to things, sleep disturbances. Sometimes you can't sleep for an extended length of time, for days. Then all of a sudden you'll crash, just like you did when you were using crystal meth. I know, it's kind of exciting. Motor coordination, dizziness problems, difficulty managing stress, craving the drug, of course. And this is right after you finish detoxifying. They say that if you use crystal meth, you get meth head for 18 months. So even if you're clean, your brain isn't going to be at its peak for about 18 months. You're not going to have completely recovered for 18 months. So you're kind of stupid for 18 months. You have all of these interesting problems. I had a student that was a meth head, and she had cleaned herself up, and then she fell off the wagon. Then she cleaned herself up, and then she fell off the wagon. And it was this really strange cycle. She'd use anything to go back out and use again. Her father went into the hospital. Guess what happened next? Her father died. Guess what happened next? The whole thing. And usually she'd get arrested when she used, not because of the drugs, but because of what she did when she used the drugs. She would float checks or kite checks, and then she'd get in trouble. Or she'd forge checks, as odd as that seems. Sometimes drug abuse is a symptom of other underlying problems. When this is the case, the user will sometimes seek the desired effect by experimenting with drug usage. Replacement they will replace the desired drug with another intoxicant. I had a friend up north who was an alcoholic, and he replaced his alcoholism with the gambling. So he'd go to the casino every night, and as long as he broke even or won, he was okay. But as soon as he started losing again, then now we got a really serious problem. Multiple drug use of different drugs to alleviate different symptoms. Cycling, using a drug intensely for a period of time, and then abstaining to lower your tolerance or to allow the body to repair. This is what Amy Winehouse would do. Amy Winehouse was an alcoholic. She used all kinds of interesting drugs, but her main drug of choice was alcohol. So what she would do, she would abstain for a select amount of time, 2 or 3 weeks. She would drop her tolerance, and then when she went on a binge, it felt that much better because she had lowered her tolerance. Well, she poisoned herself with alcohol. We're going to talk about Amy Winehouse one of these days. Anyway, she lowered her tolerance. She went on a binge and she drank herself to death, which seems kind of odd for an alcoholic that she was able to drink herself to death. But she had lowered her tolerance that much. Stacking is using 2 or more similar drugs at the same time to achieve a specific effect. People do this with marijuana. There are different types of marijuana that have different levels of THC, different amounts of whatever the C drug is, the good stuff in there. So they will use one for a euphoric effect, and they'll use another for an exciting effect. So they will stack the different types of marijuana that they smoke. Mixing using drug combinations to acquire a new effect. Speedballs are cocaine mixed with heroin. It was a speedball that killed Jim Belushi, the older one. It was also speedballs that killed, if I'm not mistaken, Chris Farley. Back in Vietnam, they used to have marijuana laced with heroin. They also have marijuana laced with cocaine. Ecstasy and LSD is called XNL. It's mixing methadone and Klonopin, mimics heroin. Methadone, of course, is what they use to get people off of heroin. And if you mix it with Klonopin, then you get the same effect as heroin. Klonopin is a antidepressant. It's a really strong antidepressant. Sometimes used as an antipsychotic. Sequentialing, going from one addiction to the other. This can either refer to drug sequentialing, drug replaced by a compulsive behavior, or one compulsive behavior replacing another. Morphine, using one drug to counteract another. Cocaine user drinking alcohol to come down. Using coffee to come down off of a drunk. Using methamphetamine to function during a heroin high. Of course, heroin, reduces your blood pressure, it slows down your heart rate, and methamphetamines accelerates it. So if you're shooting up with heroin and you want to change things, you might take a hit of methamphetamines, which is probably the dumbest thing you can do. But then again, using any of the drugs is pretty stupid. Level of use is determined by amount that you use, the frequency of use, the length of time psychoactive substances have been used by you, the impact the drug usage has on the user's life. Of course, it can, all of this stuff that they don't give it away for free. You can't go to the drugstore and buy it for a nickel. It costs a lot of money, so it potentially can really change your life. Categories of usage include abstinence, experimentation, social recreational use, habituation, abuse, and addiction. We usually don't worry about anybody until they get to here. They have developed a habit of using the drug, then they start abusing the drug, and then of course eventually they become addicted. If they're just social or recreational users, usually we don't worry about these individuals. They don't use it frequently enough that we have any problems. Or somebody that experiments with drugs. Many individuals cannot choose their level of drug use, but are at the mercy of the psychoactive properties of the drug being used. Most drugs don't really work on me. Well, heroin doesn't work. Opiates don't work on me. Alcohol, I don't get the right effect. Caffeine doesn't work. There's something wrong. But now my brother, geez, he drinks a Mountain Dew and blacks out and ends up in Maine. I don't know. He drove all the way through New York and Massachusetts and Pennsylvania and Vermont and New Hampshire and ended up in the middle of Maine and didn't even know he was driving.
I just don't get how that's possible. I mean, Mountain Dew, alcohol and other drugs, yeah, I'll get, but Mountain Dew?
It's caffeine. It's got a relatively high level of caffeine.
So That makes me wonder if coffee will do the same thing.
Yeah, it should, because it's got actually more caffeine than Mountain Dew does.
But if it has an opposite effect, then Houston, we have a problem. Just kidding.
He was really sensitive, well, and it may have been the fact that it was sugar mixed with caffeine. You know, there's a lot of sugar in Mountain Dew as well. Yeah, exactly, you better be careful. So that might have been it. I don't know how he drinks his coffee. I don't even think he drinks coffee. Now he's afraid to drink any caffeine. He's afraid to take a pill that might have caffeine in it. You know, he can't use the 5-hour energy drink or whatever. I mean, it would buzz him completely out. He might be gone forever. Abstinence means that the individual does not use any psychoactive substances except accidentally. And of course, that's all of us in the room.
Yeah.
Even if a person has a strong hereditary or environmental susceptibility for compulsive drug use, by never starting, they never get hooked. These individuals might display other compulsive behaviors such as gambling, overeating, compulsive internet use, excessive sexual behavior. It's possible. It is there. The genes are there. So they may do it in another way. They may get their jollies from another way of functioning. Research shows that the individuals who wait until they are 18 years or older to experiment with alcohol, nicotine, or marijuana are less likely to use these substances as gateway drugs for more dangerous substances such as cocaine or heroin. If you start using before the age of 18, your brain is not mature yet. Your brain's not mature at 18 either. But society puts a limit on how long you get to be educated. And 18 is the cutoff. So theoretically, you should be able to do things after the age of 18 that you couldn't do before the age of 18. You can consent to have sex. Before the age of 18, in some states, it's statutory rape. If somebody has sex with somebody younger than 18, as interesting as that is. So if you can stay away from drugs until the age of 18, you're probably going to be okay. Because instead of using your amygdala to think with, you're using your prefrontal cortex. And so you're going to reason everything out, and you're less likely to become addicted. If the individual experiments between the ages of 10 and 12, they are more likely to use the early experimentation as a gateway to more serious usage. It really all depends on when you start. It also lowers your IQ. We know that because of some of the experiments coming out of New Zealand, some of the research coming out of New Zealand. They looked at kids' IQ tests before the age of 10, and then they looked at them after the age of, I think this was a 25-year study, so this was like at 35. And what they determined was that if they started smoking marijuana before the age of 12, then it lowered their IQ between 10 and 20 points. If they used between the age of 12 and 18, it didn't affect their intelligence level. But if they used before the age of 12, they had a problem. Individuals who don't start smoking until the age of 21 are very unlikely to develop an addiction to nicotine. In other words, it's easy for those people to stop. Anyone who doesn't try an addictive substance until the age of 21 will probably not become addicted. So if you're a good boy or girl until you're 21, then you're probably going to be okay. If you started using something before the age of 21, you never know. You just never know. I told you about my friend that had a heart attack. We're still trying to find out if his kidneys are going to kick in or not. He started smoking at age 8. He's from West Virginia. It was cool for 8-year-olds to start to smoke. That's what grade is that? 3rd grade? 8-year-olds, 4th, 2nd grade, 3rd grade? Yeah, 1st grade, 6 years old. 2nd grade is 7 years old. Yeah, he's a 3rd grader when he started smoking. And here he is, he's 65. I'm 68, he's 65. And he's just had a heart attack. And it looks like he may not make it. He may not make it. But he couldn't stop smoking. And I told him, you need to stop smoking. I told him when I first met him that he needed not to stop smoking. He would, we were playing soccer together, and he'd come off the field and smoke a cigarette, which is the dumbest thing in the world because, of course, it lowers your ability to keep functioning on the field. Experimentation with psychoactive substances occurs because of curiosity, but no pattern of usage is developed, and there are no negative consequences from the experimentation unless the usage leads to injury, accident, or illness. And of course, we see this all the time. We see individuals that got drunk at age 17 because they were experimenting with drugs, and now they walk with a limp, or they're paralyzed from the waist down, an injury. These kinds of things happen. The individual has an exaggerated reaction if they are smoking marijuana and they have a susceptibility for schizophrenia. One of the things that may happen to them is they may develop schizophrenia much earlier than they would have otherwise. Pre-existing physical or mental condition is exacerbated. ADHD, probably the worst thing you can do is smoke tobacco, and of course, a lot of times these individuals will. The user is pregnant, of course, and then it affects the child. The individual is arrested for use, especially if it's crystal meth or marijuana. Heredity or environment dictates addiction because they live in an addictive environment. Their parents are users. They may, of course, find this as normal behavior. Previous addiction with other substances leads to a relapse. So they were a crystal meth user, they're a heroin user, they go out and smoke a joint, and all of a sudden, now they relapse and they go out and shoot up with heroin or whatever because of it. Social or recreational use. Social recreational users may seek out a drug for the effect, but no permanent pattern of use is developed. So they binge drink or they binge use something, but they can stay away from it because they haven't developed an addiction to it. Usage can be controlled for these individuals as long as they do not develop drug-seeking behavior. I have a friend, I have a student from Ashford. I told you about this lady. She wasn't sensitive to alcohol, so she could drink all the alcohol she wanted without getting drunk. The question is, why in the world would she go out and drink? Was it to drink at people under the table? Was she trying to show off? But sometimes she just went out and drank. She would never get drunk because she wasn't sensitive to alcohol. As odd as that seems, but she would do it anyway. And I told her not to do it. This doesn't make any sense. You're not getting the effect you're supposed to get. So why would you do it? And she would do it to impress other people. Well, it's still going to affect her health. Just because she's not getting drunk doesn't mean that she's not going to get cirrhosis of the liver. It's not destroying her liver. She probably metabolized the alcohol more readily in her stomach and from her liver. So that was the situation. She needed to stay away from alcohol. Habituation, the individual has developed a pattern of usage, but there has been no negative effects on the individual's life. This is referred to as habituation because though there is no increase of usage, the usage pattern indicates that there is a definite craving for the substance. So that is part of the habituation, is the fact that they crave the substance. And of course, they may flip into abuse. The individual continues to use the substance despite the negative life consequences that have occurred. These consequences can be personal. They lost their significant other because that significant other got tired of the way that they acted. This almost happened with me and my wife. When my wife would drink, she'd get mean, and all of a sudden I became all kinds of a son of a bitch, and I wasn't quite exactly sure why I was only a son of a bitch when she was drinking. That didn't make any sense to me, and so I got tired of it, and I was ready. I was, this close to telling her, either stop drinking or get out, that kind of a situation. Personal relationships can change your personal relationships. Problems in their social lives. You lose your friends. You lose your parents have stopped communicating with you because they can't stand it when you're drunk. Financial. everything costs money. I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but drugs also, they don't give them away on the street corners. You have to buy these things. So you're spending money on something that you potentially don't have money for. I've never smoked, but I can imagine if I were a smoker, how much money I would have spent over the last 50 years for cigarettes. Come on in. How am I doing? Wait a minute, 29 ends at 50, right? Okay, all right. Legal, of course, sometimes you get in trouble. You're using something that you're not supposed to use, and the police get involved, and then the courts get involved, and now everybody's involved. Continued use despite arrests for possession. Medical, personal health, alcoholic. If you're diabetic, the alcohol is the worst thing that you can take because it turns into alcohol or turns into sugar as soon as it hits the stomach. It turns into sugar. So if you're a diabetic, I had a friend that was a type 1 diabetic, and he wanted to be just like his brother. His brother was so cool. His brother was cool. And he wanted to be just like his brother. So he drank, just like his brother did. Well, his brother wasn't a diabetic. His brother's still alive. He died at 39. Drank himself to death. Because he was a diabetic. In order for him to drink, he would have to shoot up with insulin in order to process the alcohol. So he would have to anticipate how much alcohol he was going to drink that night, and then he would shoot himself up. Well, this man was brilliant. And he was able to do that over and over and over again. Maybe 1 out of every 25 times he got it wrong. And he would go into crisis, either alkalosis or acidosis. But, you know, he'd get it right 24 out of 25 times. But that 25th time just destroyed him. And eventually he died, and he died young. He died at 39. Really tragic. Heavy smokers with emphysema. If you've ever been to a hospital, sometimes you'll see the people with the oxygen tanks, and they'll go outside to smoke. Really? Oxygen is highly flammable, and here you are, you're smoking? Yeah, but they're addicted to it, and they can't stop. They can't not do it. Well, they're going to be dead pretty soon anyway. Not important, I'm sorry. They are going to be dead. It's really kind of tragic. But they go outside and they smoke, and they drag their oxygen behind them, and then they'll take off their cannula out of their noses so that they can smoke. Well, how stupid is that? I know.
I think I spent about 150 on cigarettes once.
Oh, you've already figured out how much money you spend on cigarettes? That's $150 you never
Just
do.
once.
Oh, this month?
No, just once.
Just once, okay. Cocaine user with hypertension, of course, he's going to blow his heart out. He doesn't stop snorting cocaine, but of course he can't stop. Work or school related, it's going to really screw up your schoolwork. Emotional stability. If an LSD user has mental instability, then of course it can kick them into psychosis. Addiction, the difference between abuse and addiction is the compulsive behavior of the addict. Addiction is a classification if the individual has no control over duration of usage or the amount used. In other words, they start using and they don't know when they stopped. They use until they don't have any more. And sometimes they'll lose days. They'll lose weeks. Sometimes they'll lose months. The individual has been unsuccessful at control, of course. They spend an inordinate amount of time obtaining drugs or recovering from usage. I had a friend that came back from Vietnam he smoked pot. And he was addicted, well, I don't know, he claimed he wasn't addicted to pot. He could stop anytime he wanted. But he spent every day after coming back from Vietnam trying to find some pot. He stole all of his parents' things. He wrecked cars. They used to own a farm. It was like a 200-acre farm. And every time he would get into trouble, they would sell one of their fields. And eventually, they sold all their fields. They lost the farm because of this kid.
I've actually, one time I was back in my hometown, there was people that I knew of that were alcoholics.
Mhm.
They owned a trailer,
Mhm.
and they kept breaking piece by piece off that trailer just to get alcohol.
Oh, is that
By
right?
the end of the year, there was nothing left.
There was nothing left of the trailer. As crazy as that is.
So I was like, why would you?
So eventually this guy, they lost their farm. They lost all their farm equipment. They lost everything. So all they had left was Social Security. Well, the father finally died of a broken heart. I'm sure he died of a broken heart. And so that now the mother's in the nursing home, and every month she gets a Social Security check. But most months she didn't get to the post office early enough to get that Social Security check. He would race her to the post office, and if he got there first, then he would steal her Social Security check. He would forge her signature and cash the Social Security check and use it to buy pot. That's ugly, isn't it? I know. He's got cancer now. He's got a brain tumor. Of course, he hasn't done anything for most of his life except when he was in the military. He had these jobs for 6 months or whatever, but he couldn't keep them because, well, he had to look for pot every day. He had to find it. He had to find a supply. And then at night, of course, he would spend all night smoking pot in his basement, wherever he was. I know. And now he's dying. And his mother finally died. And he's old enough to get his own Social Security. So that's what he spends his money on pot. How stupid is that? But he's dying, so what's going to happen next? They limit social, occupational, or recreational activities for use. This guy did nothing but look for pot. That's it. He was always trying to find a supplier. And when he found a supplier, the only friends he had was his supplier. That was it. If you would sometimes see him on the street, if you did, he tried to borrow money from you so that, he's not looking for $5. This guy's looking for a 20. He wants you to lend him $50. He's good for it. He'll pay you next week. Of course, you don't see him next week. You'll never see him again, probably. Your $50 has just gone down the toilet, or actually up in smoke. They continue use despite physical, social, relationship, or psychological problems. This is a guy that had 3 women pregnant at the same time, and they gave birth within a week of one another.
How the heck is... How does somebody do that?
He had his wife, his ex-wife, and his girlfriend pregnant all at the same time. And he got, I don't know if he got them all pregnant at the same time. I have no clue about
What do you do?
that.
Get all 3 of them at the same
They gave birth within a week of one another. That's when he went to Vietnam. The only reason he went to Vietnam was to get away from the child support payments. And of course, what happened next? They garnished his wages while he was in the military. He was one pissed off puppy.
You can't run from child support. Is he crazy?
He's trying to get away.
Where's he gonna go? Wherever he goes, it's gonna follow.
Well, he was hoping that, I don't know what he was hoping. He's not real bright. They use the morning for a jump start on the day, and that's what he would do. He would smoke all night, and then he would sleep all morning. He would, if you saw him in the morning, he was always drinking orange juice. No idea what the orange juice had to do with anything, but he felt like it was, I don't know, vitamin C. I have no idea what was going on with this guy. Really kind of strange. If you saw him on the street, he always had a great big jug of orange juice. I think it was orange juice. Well, it was orange anyway. Whatever it was. It was orange juice. And he's just walking along, looking for a handout or whatever. They defend their drug usage with anger or even rage. And of course, if you talk to him about people that are coming off of marijuana are not the happiest people in the world. They're happy while they're smoking, but when they're not smoking, they're mean. They're not happy people. And of course, that's the way he would react as well. They experience withdrawal. Of course, he'd ask you for money, and he's the nicest guy in the world. And if you said no, wow. why in the world do I, why are you so angry about me not giving you money? I don't have to give you any more money. What's going on? They experience withdrawal when unable to use the drug, of course. They must increase the amount used to obtain the desired effects. And of course, he's been smoking. Of course, marijuana is not that way. You don't have to use more and more and more marijuana. Eventually, you get to the point where less marijuana, just smoking marijuana, will give you the same reverse tolerance. It has reverse tolerance.
I have friends and siblings on my dad's side who are bad at smoking.
Is that right? And they're mean when they're not smoking. You don't want to be around them when they're not smoking.
Exactly.
Addiction comprises the 4 C's: control, loss of control, compulsive use of the drug, craving the drugs, and continued use of the drugs. The 4 C's. As fascinating as that is. The American Psychiatric Association has identified substance use as a mental illness since the printing of their first diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders in 1952. The DSM-5 divides substance abuse disorders into 2 general categories: substance-related disorders and substance addictive disorders. The DSM-5 deals with several drugs which include alcohol, stimulants, cannabis or marijuana, cocaine, hallucinogens, inhalants, opioids, anxiolytics, sedatives, hypnotics, caffeine, and tobacco. So the DSM-5 talks about all of these. There's a lot of people that take in caffeine, and they don't think of it as a psychoactive substance. But the reality is, if it wakes you up, then it is a psychoactive substance. If you're my brother, it's a real psychoactive substance. He blacks out when he drinks. When he mixes sugar with caffeine, I can't imagine. My dad used to drink pot after pot of coffee. Cream and sugar. Put a lot of cream and sugar in it. But he would drink, my God, he must have had 15, 20 cups of coffee a day.
Oh my God.
And it didn't touch him. It didn't bother him at all.
I could barely even finish a cup.
I mean, it didn't hurt him. And evidently I've got his genes, because it doesn't affect me either. I can drink all the caffeine in the world and I don't get buzzed out at all. Nothing happens to me. My brother drinks a Mountain Dew and ends up in Maine. So evidently he takes that more after my mom and my dad. Addictive disease model. This model of addiction sees addiction from the medical point of view. That addiction is a disease. It's chronic, it's progressive, you can relapse from it. It's incurable. You have to stay away from the drug for the rest of your life. It's potentially fatal. Alcohol will kill you. That's one of the reasons why using the disease model, marijuana is not really going to kill you unless you get cancer, of course, but it's not going to kill you just taking the substance. LSD, you can't poison yourself with LSD. So is it really an addictive substance, according to the disease model? This model assumes that the addiction is caused from genetic irregularities in brain chemistry and anatomy that are triggered by certain drugs. Research shows that heredity influences drug use and addiction as much as 40 to 60%. So if you come from a family of people that are addicted to anything, then there is a possibility that you will become addicted as well. So what you need to do is stay away from whatever it is. Compulsive drug use with prolonged intoxication with the need to continue use. This is the addictive disease model. You have the inability to control your own usage, inability to stop use despite physical, mental, or social problems, repeated attempts to control use, increased intake over time, incurable. In other words, you can't get over the addiction. Pathological reactions such as blackouts or dramatic personality changes. That's my brother, blacked out drinking a bottle of Mountain Dew. It's the yellow stuff. I drink the red stuff, so I guess I don't know. It's that red dye number 5. That's what tempers it, makes it okay. It's not the only disease model out there. There are other theories of addiction. Behavior environmental model. This theory purports that negative environmental factors such as abuse, anger, and peer pressure may cause people to seek, use, and sustain a dependence on the substances. You may have seen this in high school. All the stoners, they were out there. All the smokers, they were out there. These guys fed each other. They supported each other in their addiction. This model emphasizes the progressive nature of the 6 levels of drug use: abstinence, experimentation, social recreational use, habituation, abuse, and addiction. The academic model, that's the third model that we're going to talk about. Addiction occurs when the body adapts to the toxic effects of the drugs at a biochemical and cellular level. Natural balance has been thrown off, causing 4 physiological changes. Either you develop tolerance, you develop tissue dependence, you have withdrawal symptoms, or you have psychological dependence. All of these 4 can actually take place at the same time. Diathesis stress model. This model was first developed to explain the causes of schizophrenia. It is a combination of the addictive disease model and the behavioral environmental model. Diathesis means a predisposition or vulnerability to, and in this case, the individual may have a genetic and environmental predisposition to the drug addiction. Stress triggers the drug need, and the stronger the diathesis, the more likely that the individual will drift into addiction. Oh, I got lost too. Okay. Heredity. Researchers have found that genetics does influence addiction, but that there are over 100 genes that have something to do with drug abuse. We can talk about receptors, gene transcription factors, enzymes in your system, neuropeptides. If we talk about the Japanese, for example, they don't have as much of the enzyme in the stomach to break down alcohol. So if we're dealing with somebody that's Japanese, potentially they're going to get drunk a lot faster than somebody who's Caucasian. Asians don't handle alcohol as well as Caucasians do. Nobody handles alcohol as well as Caucasians do. They are professionals. Don't ever drink with a Caucasian. Wait a minute, can I tell this story? I have a friend back up north. He was telling me this story about, he used to ride rodeos. So they would go from rodeo to rodeo. One's in Gallup, New Mexico, the next one's in Phoenix. So they all jump in a pickup truck and they head out, with their saddles in the back and all that. So they're up in Montana, and they were heading across Montana. One was in Kalispell, and the next one was at Fort Peck. So here they are, they're traveling across, and of course they can't start until after the rodeo's over. So they jump in the truck and they start across, and they decide to camp for the night. So they get out and they camp for the night, and it was these 2 native guys and this Canadian. So and they were drinking. Of course they were drinking. So they get drunk and they decide that they're going to rob the Canadian. They're going to rob the white guy. So they get themselves a club to hit him over the head. They're going to kill him. They're going to hit him in the head and kill him. Well, they hit him with a stick, and they were so drunk they didn't realize the stick was rotten. So when they hit him with this thing, it just exploded, and they hardly did any damage. So then one of them picked up a rock and started hitting the guy in the head. I know. Could be an ugly story. And the guy got up. Of course, the Canadian has all this tolerance for alcohol. He's been drinking the same amount as they have. So he gets up and he says, "What are you guys doing? We got to get up in the morning. We need to go to bed. We can't play like this." And they're all going, "Oh my God, he's going to kill us," because he's huge, and they're these little tiny guys. Anyway, and nothing happened. He didn't realize what was going on. They're hitting him with rocks, they're hitting him with sticks. They're trying to kill the guy. I know. It's really kind of weird.
And you thought they were playing.
And he thought they were playing with it. Yeah. I know.
I'm sorry.
White people, they got heads that are this thick. Anyway, they didn't kill him. It was funny.
Yeah, but I bet you I'd probably be laughing like, "What are you guys doing?"
And it's funny because, I'm driving with this guy, and he's telling me the story, and he's sitting over there, and I'm driving, and I'm thinking, is he going to kill me? Wait a minute. And he gets real quiet when he tells the story, because he didn't know how I take it, but I thought it was kind of funny. Yeah, I know. He should have been arrested or something. Nobody died, everybody's happy. Why don't we stop right here? We'll pick this up next time, talking about heredity and some of the different things that can happen. Thank you for sticking around for the entire